All right. Welcome, Byron Breedlove, Emory and Henry class of 75. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well today. How are you?
I'm doing great. We want to talk to you today, but I always tell people we have this graduate and he has like the weirdest job ever. And now I say we have this graduate and he has the most perfectly suited job right now for this situation ever. You are the managing editor for a magazine called Emerging Infectious Diseases that's put out by the CDC.
That's correct.
What is it like to be in that job right now?
It's pretty unimaginable at the moment. The journal is 25 years old this year, and this is actually what it was designed for. When the Joshua Lederberg, who was a Nobel laureate, was the person who gets a lot of credit for explaining what was happening in the field of emerging infections and how we really didn't have a handle on what was going to be happening. We thought we understood, but as things changed, climate changed, people traveled, people were in more contact with each other, incursions on land, things were going to start changing in the disease world, and it did. So until now,
that was what year?
That was in the early 90s
Okay.
when he testified before Congress. There was a report, he and others, and and this journal is sort of an outgrowth of some of that work that he did back then. And CDC started the journal to fill in a niche, a gap, because there was not a scientific peer-reviewed journal about emerging infectious diseases.
Well, that answers that question, because I did think of all the publications CDC could put out, this was it struck me as being an unusual topic, but I guess that makes sense if it sort of filled a niche that wasn't being taken care of.
And the idea then, and still is, was that, well, we're going to make this journal accessible for anybody. In other words, it's not going to charge for content. It's not going to charge authors. All the content, whatever's published is going to be open access. And of course, I'm sure a lot of people hear about open access and paywall and scientific publishing. And the journal's in a unique position because, as well, it's federally funded, so it's taxpayer funded, so we don't have to worry about creating revenue. So we can be open access for authors, no fees for submissions, changing publication, unlike a lot of other open access journals. And then everything that we publish is in the public domain.
And the subscriptions are free. I didn't realize that till I read that. That's interesting.
It's free. And what a subscription is now is you get an email saying, hey, the latest issue is available. So anybody can go to the journal's website, just look up Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal and sign up to get notifications by email. And you can tailor those notifications for the whole table of contents, or if there's a particular area or disease of interest, we have emails for those, as well as continuing medical education credits and podcast emails as well. We do podcasts as well.
Well, I get the impression that probably your subscriptions might be up just a little bit right now.
They have gone up a bit. I would say we've seen some significant growth. Yeah.
Tell us about some of those numbers that were in the email you sent me about eyeballs on your articles and about subscriptions and.
Oh, sure. Let me actually just pull up a few stats on my other screen, if you don't mind, to help.
Sure, yeah, that would be great.
So back at the first of the year, we were chugging along, doing our usual, various emerging infections, and our most viewed article had about 20,000 views. Now, I will have to say that we have not tracked views of articles going back to 1995 because we didn't have the technology to do it
Sure.
then.
Yeah.
Plus,
They
we've
make
got
it
a real
easier now,
whiz,
don't they?
make it easier, and we have a real whiz who's our developer on staff, a guy who's been with us a few years, and he's just, anytime we throw out, some idea, can we do this, he figures out how to do it. So we've only been tracking views for about 3 years. And back at the first of the year, we had an article that had about 20,000 views total. It's called 1918 Influenza, the Mother of All Pandemics. So it's about that, outbreak of what was called Spanish flu back in 1918.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, by the way, Spanish flu is a misnomer. The only reason it's called that is Spain did not censor its information in its
I just
reporting.
heard that on a podcast on Throughline. That was an
Yeah,
interesting bit of information. I never knew that.
right, because it really got started in the trench warfare, a lot of that in World War I in
Huh.
other countries. But
Right.
anyway, we have an article written by a medical historian, a couple of medical historians, and that had been always a very perennially popular article, had about 20,000 views. And so we had other articles that were beginning to, zoom up, and then we started getting COVID-19 articles. Back probably in February, they started to trickle in,
Mm-hmm.
and the journal it's a peer-reviewed journal. So whatever's published goes through a peer review process. It's not just you submit and get published. So we're editorially independent. Says my internet. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah,
sorry.
no, you're good. Mm-hmm.
Sorry. We're editorially independent, and just for clarification, Centers for Disease Control does not tell the journal what to publish or not publish. It's not, this
That's
journal is not,
interesting.
the journal's not the official voice of CDC. And we don't publish that much from CDC authors. We have maybe, it varies, 10 to 25% in a given year of submissions might come from CDC-based authors. Most come from other places around the world. So you don't look at this journal, you go to the MMWR to find out the official view of CDC.
Oh.
So we're just like New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of American Medical Association, Lancet, Clinical Infectious Diseases. We're an independent journal.
Did that ever get complicated? Does CDC ever go, don't do this, or we know we can't tell you not to do this, but we wish you wouldn't?
Yeah, occasionally, not very often, but occasionally there's been a little bit of heartburn. In the past, there's been an article or two where I think CDC might have been happier if we hadn't published it. But the point is, the journal's about the science and what the results of the science are and how that science is evaluated through the peer review process.
So up to now, your 20,000 views of an article was a big deal. So what have your numbers been like lately?
After COVID-19, the first article that really sort of got the lift was actually a letter from, I believe, let me see, it was 2012. Hold on, I'm going to look it up for you. June 2016, we published an article called Simple Respiratory Mask, which basically says, here's how you make a homemade mask out of a t-shirt. Has a diagram to go with it, and it describes how you can make a serviceable mask, certainly not one that's going to be like a high quality, but one that will help. And so once the coronavirus we realized it was everywhere, that article started getting a lot of attention, and for quite a while it was the most viewed article in the journal. It now has over 500,000 views, and for us that's quite good. But the one that really took off it's called COVID-19 Outbreak Associated with Air Conditioning and Restaurant Guangzhou. I'm going to butcher the name. Guangzhou, China, 2020. And that article has over 800,000 views. So what happened is it got picked up by all the news media. And if you've ever seen on the news a chart about restaurant seating and how COVID spread around a restaurant,
Yeah.
or if you're reading stuff about droplets, that's the article. So that article became extremely popular among viewers. And then also there's a metric called alt metric that scientific journals can use to track the attention that articles get. And I don't mean the scientific citations, when other journals are citing articles, that takes a while for those citation counts to build up. You hear about journal impact factors and things like that. They're based on citation counts. What the altmetric score is, it shows who's talking about it on Twitter, Facebook, who's blogging, who's writing about it in the news, broadcasting and so forth. So this particular story about the air conditioning took off, and it's got the 14th most views of 15,094,120 scholarly articles ever published. So,
good Lord.
So we've got
It's gotten
several
the
other
most views, but among 15 million different scholarly articles.
Yeah, there are only 14 more that have been seen or reported by media out of 15 plus million. And we've got a number of others, again, about the COVID, different articles that are in the top 200. We've got a couple others in the top 100. And so these articles, my point is that it's very important news that when we got the articles, certainly our editor-in-chief and the peer reviewers recognized how important the content was, and none of us, I guess, at that point understood how valuable or how much attention some of this material would get. So the journal is now definitely, I would say, more of a destination for scientists and researchers, place where they want to publish, because they know they're going to be able to get their content out there. We've got to,
and people will see it and take it seriously.
People will see it. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like I need to make sure that there's another interesting twist about this magazine. We've done a story about you once before. For the fact that, let's face it, if you hear that there's a magazine called Emerging Infectious Diseases, people expect to see, a slide, a microscope slide with something swirling around. That's what you expect to see, or a picture of the coronavirus, which we've all gotten so used to seeing now. But your magazine's not like that. Your magazine has beautiful art on the cover. Tell us about that, because that's an interesting choice, and it's interesting. It's an interesting way to communicate.
Well, and what happened, and so to date, probably, I don't know, about 230. I don't know what the count is at the moment, but about around 230 of the covers have featured art. Art was first used in December 1997 on the cover, and the journal used to be a print journal initially, with print being the primary way that it was distributed, and the secondary way was on the internet. So, and now we do not print because we've gone online only starting this year. But I think the genesis of the idea came from the fact that we had a very governmental looking publication. It was a quarterly publication, and someone in the government, in the print shop at CDC, who I guess had an eye for design or graphics, mentioned to our the previous managing editor, nobody's going to look at this thing. Look at it. It just looks like this plain government. And it does. I've got a slide where I show the evolution of the covers from just this really dull gray and white cover, and it's not very imaginative. And so the suggestion was, you ought to put something on there to get people to, at least open it up. So in December 97, for the first time, artwork was used on the cover as a way to get people to pay attention. So if it's lying there on someone's desk or table, you might take a second look.
Yeah.
And then in October 2000, again, Polly Potter was the original managing editor of the journal, and she has a background more in the arts, fine arts, than I do, and she decided to start writing essays about the cover art that would relate them to the science in some way, to help humanize the content, because this is some pretty scary esoteric stuff. So
Yeah.
the thought was, well, let's have at least this one article in the journal that pretty much anybody can pick up and read. So that's where that started, and it's continued ever since.
Well, you showed me a flyer. You're getting ready to speak to a group about making the connection between the humanities and sciences, and the humanities and
Right.
some of this news that's going on. So so practice on us. Give us your 60-second spiel on how that works.
On how the two
Yeah, how they're connected and how one helps the other.
well, I think the best thing I could tell you and is that okay, so let me think about this a second. So what we're trying to do is, with the cover art, our editor-in-chief, Dr. Peter Drotman, picks a theme for each of the issues. And when he picks a theme, I try to figure out some sort of art that's going to somehow relate to that theme, or that I can make relate to it. And we have to, it requires knowing something about art, science, literature, history, kind of a lot of those liberal arts things that I picked up at Emory and Henry, which have stayed with me all these years. And the goal is not to try to be cute or playful or anything like that, but it's really to it's to humanize the content, to say that these issues, these infectious diseases, affect humanity in many ways, and that people have always expressed themselves through art, and so art is a way that we can cover, or we can explain to others, or share human suffering, happiness, state of affairs. So that was the idea behind it. And
well, and I'm thinking that probably, I mean, there are a lot of things. Well, I mean, there are a lot of things that a virus or an infectious disease will impact that are very, very human and not necessarily scientific. And there probably over the centuries have been expressions about things that
right.
have shown the impact of that never really connected it back to the science, because people didn't know.
Right.
I listened to a podcast recently about how many major points in history have been changed by mosquitoes.
Sure.
Because of malaria and those war campaigns that stopped, or whatever, that invasions that stopped because of mosquitoes. And so but so all these things we hear in history and the artistic representations of those moments in history, they don't really show the mosquito, and yet there's this malaria thing lurking around, impacting every bit of that.
And we've done, and you're right, so sometimes the connection, it's almost the other way around. I'll see an image and I'll think, well, that could relate to, say, malaria, because for example, I was looking around for artwork back a few years ago, and ran across on this obscure art site an image of a mosquito with a jug of blood on its back. It's almost cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's this old mosquito carrying his blood around, and showed it to my editor-in-chief, who he hated it, of course, immediately. And then I showed it to the head of the malaria branch at CDC, who a fellow I've co-written 11 of these essays with. He's now retired from CDC to pursue his other passion, which is he and his partner are making pies. So they've got a book out, a best-selling book, The New American Pie. But
You're
oh
kidding.
yeah, no, he's all over the place. A guy named Paul Argwin. But so Paul and I
How
were looking
funny.
at this, and Paul said, "We got to do this. This is crazy." But everything about the image is wrong. Everything, because male mosquitoes don't bite, they don't transmit disease.
You're right. It's just the women.
Yeah,
Right.
just yeah.
Yeah.
But so he said, but we can use it to illustrate in a an attention getting way, call attention to malaria, call attention to how mosquitoes transmit, just because instead of doing the same old thing that's always done, we'll do something totally different. I mean,
Oh,
sometimes that's
fun.
the direction the artwork
Right.
will take.
Well, I just think it's fascinating, and I remembered that conversation with you several years ago, just thinking that is the craziest and most interesting thing ever, that they're using art to communicate some of this. And I love that the photo we're going to use with the printed version of this story is a picture of you in a T-shirt that says, "This English major believes in science." So I'm going to have to make you give the push for Emory, a little plug for Emory and Henry,
Okay.
and say, were you always interested in that range of things, or is that something that developed while you were a student?
When I was a kid, I guess before school, when I was learning to read, I was always interested in, well, like most young kids, dinosaurs. So I took a deep dive into paleontology, and my dad worked at a quarry and would always be bringing home fossils. So I had a collection of trilobites and,
Oh,
images of
fun.
ferns and different weird things. So for, as this kid, I was, classic nerd. Dinosaur collection, rock
Nerds
collection, all
rule.
that.
We're good with that.
Yeah. And somehow that morphed into this fascination with astrophysics, and so all through later elementary school and high school, I was convinced I wanted to be a physicist. There was a problem with this that I later discovered, and it's simply that I don't have the kind of brain that does math, and how much mathematics is involved with physics, and how much is formulas and all of that. So I actually enrolled at Emory and Henry as a physics major, which doesn't make a lot of sense in a way, because certainly there were some physics classes and good professors, but one doesn't normally go to a liberal arts college to study physics, and
yet many have.
Many have. But what happened was I had to take my prerequisite English classes, and I'd always been pretty good at English in high school anyway, and writing, and always liked to read. So got into a class with this fella, Professor, the late Lamar Smith.
Oh, loved him.
And
loved him.
That was it.
And suddenly you were reading Greek mythology and left physics behind.
Yeah, staying up all night to study for Dante's Inferno test and writing papers, and that led to other classes with Turner Kleinert and then
oh, sweet.
And then Bob Denham, and
sure.
And then with Bob's classes, it became this. It wasn't. I mean, with Lamar, it was always more about the literature and understanding the context of it, and the novels and what it was about, and it was fascinating. And with Turner Kleinert's classes, I kind of remember it being more about the whole history, everything going on around that particular piece of literature, such as say the Canterbury Tales. You wouldn't just learn the Canterbury Tales, but you would learn the context and the history
right.
About that, and what was going on in cosmology or philosophy and things like that. And then in Bob Denham's classes, the literary criticism aspect was, he often emphasized that, and I was always struck by, this is a lot like science. It's like applying science to literature and using these principles. And so it was fascinating to me, and I just remember having assignments from him, and to study something and write a literary critique. And I would get up and present something, and he would sit there and listen very patiently and say, yeah, that's really interesting, but everything you just said's wrong, and here's why, and things like that.
And yet you stuck it out and still finished with an English major. That's
Yeah,
stick-to-itiveness for you.
and then I went on and decided that wasn't enough, so and went to Georgia Southern. It was college then for a master's in English, eventually thinking I would get a PhD in English, but didn't work out that way.
Well,
But
it seems like you're doing okay without it. Just saying, you get kind of a cool job.
I have an interesting job, I have to admit. It's not something I saw myself doing 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and you do you feel like you sort of harken back to some of those things that you learned at Emory and Henry? I mean, you were in a weirdly liberal artsy kind of job where you were literally putting together two things that don't normally go together. And so, did you
Yes.
feel kind of prepared for that moment?
Well, I did. I think what I got out of a lot of what I got out of Emory and Henry was first of all, the rigorous academic, expectations of the classes, but at the same time, there were opportunities to just let your brain go and figure stuff out on your own. And talking again about Dr. Dunham's classes, I remember my senior year, there was a class, Man and His Fictions, and I still remember the final exam, and I still remind him of this when I talk to him. Because the final exam was, what is fiction? 3 questions. What is fiction? What are its conventions? How do they work? So I think I spent
So,
about eight hours on that. But the point is, other things like that sort of train your brain to just go explore and figure stuff out and synthesize, pull things together. And that was always that's a valuable skill to this day. And the other thing about Emory and Henry was there were opportunities such as, and maybe this still helps me in some way. I'd mentioned WLRC, the radio station,
yeah.
which actually my short stint as a physics major led me to that, because the physics professor, and I'm not remembering the gentleman's name now, had been the sponsor of the radio station, but it was off air. It hadn't been on air for like a year. So I got the keys and went in and started dusting it, cleaning it up, and checked stuff to see if it worked. And we started recruiting people, and we got back on air. And I worked as the program director for that till I graduated from college. But it was
Wow.
a lot of those sort of managerial things, just figuring out how to do stuff. And
And you
I
had
think,
a little something for your resume.
yeah. So it's a little something different going on there that I thought was really, I still remember that, and things I learned how to do, and how to get things done. So, for example, we couldn't get any funding till we got about 4 members of the radio station elected to student council, so we could vote funding.
Are you telling me politics was important even back then?
I suppose in a way it was.
I'm
That's
thinking.
just, but hey.
Well, let's end on talking a little bit about next steps in this world. I mean,
Okay.
you've seen lots of articles, you've seen lots of I've read all 5,000 articles that have been submitted recently, but what are you seeing that gives you a little bit of hope moving forward?
What I'm seeing is, and of course I'm speaking only on my own behalf, not in any
Exactly.
official capacity in any way, but from the reading I do and the conversations I have, I think first of all, we're getting a really deep knowledge base about COVID-19, about what it is and how it's unlike anything we've seen before. So it's taking time to figure out all the ways it manifests, all the things that it's capable of doing, how it transmits, and how one protects, how you protect yourself and others from it. And we still don't know a lot of this stuff, but we're beginning to get a lot of this information. So it now is going to be up to scientists and policymakers to work together to figure out and there's so much of this material, it's impossible to go through it all, but to
Right.
figure out what's the worthwhile research, what's solid, what gives you a foundation for next steps. So just the amount of attention on it is amazing. I think it's unprecedented. So that offers some hope. And so having more data, more information, that's essential for the next steps to
Yeah.
know how to act.
Go ahead.
We're also seeing, and this journal and others have done a number of studies, have published studies about effectiveness of different interventions, such as what's known as social distancing and other ways that you maybe are non-conventional in that they're more policy or behaviorally based than medicinal, but still those are they're having an effect on reducing the spread of the disease. But it worries me that science isn't being taken as seriously as it needs to by people, because we all want to get on with our lives. We're all tired of this, and I know we are here.
Oh, sure, because you're working at home too, right?
I'm working at home. Yeah. My whole staff has been. It was mid-March when any of us were last in the office. So yeah, we're all working from home, and I don't know how much longer we will be working from home, but there's no plan to go back anytime soon.
Yeah.
Because there's no real upside to doing that at the moment. So
so you understand the fatigue, but you've also been, but you also want to take it seriously.
Yes, I do. Yeah. But I think, for me too, see, it's a bit of a different experience than a lot of people, because I'm still working. And so I really feel bad for so many people.
I know.
People I know, family, friends, people I know who either are barely working or not able to work. And so it's really tough. I mean,
yeah, it's not an easy answer for sure.
No easy answers for anyone. And so what I'm hoping is that through all the research and science that's being done around the world, that we figure out how do we best go on after this, and what do we do suppose this mutates and becomes worse, or maybe it's like that old movie, The Andromeda Strain, which I watched a few weeks ago again, where
I don't understand people who watch scary virus movies right now. I know I have friends doing it, and I don't get it.
That's the only one I've watched. Believe me, I didn't watch Contagion or any of the others. But that one just happened to be on, and I got drawn into it. And so it was just, but in that one, the virus, I remember, mutated into a non-lethal form. So.
Well, that would be nice. Let's end on that thought.
So let's hope that happens. Yeah.
That would be nice.
Let's hope for some good news. Yeah.
It just mutates into puppies. Something we could love.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, Byron, this has been fascinating, and I still will tell everybody, I know this guy who has the weirdest job in the world, but suddenly it is the most interesting and perfect, like the guy you want to talk to job, because it is interesting what you do. It's always been interesting what you've been doing, but certainly it's interesting to have an alum in such an interesting spot at this particular juncture in history. So thank you.
And this isn't what I saw myself doing as a English major in Emory and Henry many years ago, but I can sort of connect the dots and look at how I got here. And I would say to other up and coming liberal arts students that there's a lot you can do with a liberal arts career that maybe you haven't thought about. So let your imagination run free, and be willing to take chances with what you're doing. And yeah, I've had a few stumbles here and there, but I feel like I've been lucky to land here, and figure I'll be here for a bit longer. So
that's terrific.
Good to talk with you.
Well, it's good to talk to you, and I know you're crazy busy, so thank you so much for taking time out for us today.
Okay. Well,
And
certainly.
we'll be looking. I'm going to put a link with this story about how people can subscribe to the
EID journal? Sure.
the EID journal, because I think that's really cool that it's free and might be fascinating reading right now. And sometimes getting a little bit of science behind all the news is a helpful thing. So it's nice to have some data. So we appreciate you putting that out.
All right.
All right. Well,
Stay
Byron,
safe, stay
thank
well.
you.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you.